Welcome, welcome, and shalom again to another exciting edition, hopefully, of the Torah Watchman show. Hope everyone's been well, and with true emas and sincerity, I mean what I say. I hope you've been well, because if you're watching this video, then you're sharing in the spirituality of Elohim reaching out to my nefesh and bringing to you a very important message of truth. Listen, I don't want to waste your time. Your time is worth money and is precious to you. Every moment of life is precious. My time is precious too. My wife has a huge honey-do list for me every time I get home from work. And my daughter is very demanding. But you are equally important to me. That's why I have this message of truth to get to you. The title of this video is The Myth of Oral Law. So ben-Emmett, what he's talking about. Oral law is the cornerstone of Rabbinical Judaism. It is everything that quantifies what it means to be Jewish, or is it not? You talk to any Orthodox rabbi, they'll tell you about kosherut, about kosher markings of food, beverages, and things of this nature. Glatt kosher. You should not eat at any restaurant that serves supposedly kosher food if it doesn't have that glatt kosher seal of approval on the doorway, or some licensing there when you walk in and see evidence of that. And most observant Orthodox Jews do not go to places with mixed kosherut for various reasons. Now, Orthodox Judaism pretty much owns the entire environment of Judaism, pretty much. They have the greatest funding effort out there. And a lot of the host governments, they get taxes and they get funding and special contributions from very wealthy Jewish businessmen to Orthodoxy, because they think, well, I'm secular, I'm not observant, but if I give $1 million to this yeshiva, or I give $1 million to purchasing, this new synagogue and setting up mikvah and purchasing Torahs, which are all very, very expensive, they feel that they've done a mitzvah. They feel that their soul is forgiven by doing good works. Well, this may be true or may not. But your investment strategy is very important. Just like your time with me this evening, I ask you to please subscribe and personally notify. So let me get started. For anyone out there that does not understand what oral law is, essentially there are two types of positions of the Jewish faith. There is written law, which is everything you read in the 5 books of Torah, and in the Nevi'im, the major and minor prophets, and the sacred writings. That is called the written law, and it's written because God wrote it through his prophets. Yes, Moshe was a prophet. He was not considered to be a rabbi in his time. The term rabbi came much, much, much further along. For instance, 2,000 years ago, when we had a Sanhedrin set up in a court system in Judea underneath Roman occupation, even them, they were not referred to as rabbis. They were referred to as Pharisees and Sadducees. But anyway, Rabbinical Judaism has branded its mark, indelible mark, upon every single Jewish aspect of life in the diaspora. It really has, for good or bad. We owe a lot to Orthodox Judaism. We owe a lot to the rabbis in the past. I'm not going to be throwing any rabbis underneath the bus, but I want to define terms, and I want you to form your own educated opinion. So the term oral law is essentially defines Rabbinical Judaism. In other words, opinionated Judaism by rabbis. Why do I say opinionated? Is because the Talmud and Midrashic studies and commentaries are essentially about 2,000 rabbis and scribes, roughly, maybe a little bit more, that have debated actively over a period of time, hundreds of years, through various yeshivas and synagogues, or in public sectors, or even among a dinner table at their home. And they found the written Torah, the written law of Moshe and the prophets, too confusing to accept whole cloth. I mean, verbatim. So, they had to debate, for instance, what does it mean, do not boil a kid in his mother's milk? What does it mean to keep Shabbath holy? What did these things mean? And especially in their time, which was the Middle Ages. When I said Middle Ages, I would say roughly 10th to about 15th century, when everything was finally codified and canonized and put together. We 2,000 years ago, we were reading from scrolls, papyrus scrolls, and things of that nature. But back to the oral law. The oral law is the Jewish code of justice, of judgment. What is kosher, what's not kosher, and that applies not just to food and animals. That applies to you as well, believe it or not. But this is something they say that was spoken by God. It was an addendum to the written law that it was received on Mount Sinai. Well, first of all, that's just not true. It's not factually supported. It's not historically supported. It doesn't even, the words oral law does not even occur anywhere in the Tanakh, and the Tanakh is a massive biblical work. It really is. The term rabbi is not used there either. But anyway, beginning with definition of term, oral law is something that rabbis, rabbinates, come up with, I would say, during the Babylonian exile, 632 or so, maybe BCE, and the first Talmud was written down, and again in scrolls and parchments and things of that nature, and the Babylonian Tractate, which is actually differentiated from the Jerusalem or the Palestinian Talmud. So the two major Talmuds, you have the Babylonian Talmud, essentially, and you have the Jerusalem Talmud, which coincidentally was never finished because in 135 CE, all the Jews were exiled from Judea and most of Eretz Israel. So when you hear people say oral law, you're thinking about the Talmud and you think about the Mishnah Torah, okay? And all the contributors that went into those works. I have some of the major works in my library. I'm not like some other people that burns books and destroys works and relics and things of that nature. I have some Siduras going back in the 1800s when in countries that really don't exist anymore. I'm a book collector. I'm not a hoarder, but I love sacred writings. I love books, and I like to have a good frame of reference before I speak, before I give lectures and things of this nature. But back to oral law. It impacts every single thing. For instance, what is tefillin? Well, tefillin is not defined in the Torah, in the books of Moses. What is or mezuzahs? About lighting of Shabbos candles. Talking about tzitzit. There's a huge debate among rabbis over a period of time about should tzitzit be simply all white, and some Hasidic, ultra-Orthodox Hasidic sects make them all black, or should you have the blue thread running through them and kind of a chain-like arrangement and design that Sephardi rabbis recommend for their congregations. Of course, the blue was believed 2,000 years ago to come from a now extinct sea urchin that the Romans over-harvested and drove to extinction because it was used for royal things, for kings and queens and things of that nature. It was a very beautiful dye color that's used for garments and things, robes and things of that nature. However, there were no sea urchins in the time of Moshe. It was just the blue desert sky above them. And the sky symbolized to them during that time of looking up toward the Shamayim, the heavens, and God, his celestial court and everything else. So that's why the blue was indicative of the blue sky during that time. Of course, blue has many different shades. I'm not going to go into a rabbit hole with this, but this is something that oral law says that we should only have white tzitzits, or takalis, as they call them, because we're not sure of the blue color anymore. Well, you read in the Torah, it's very clear. The color for blue in Hebrew was very distinctive in that time. So you just use a couple of educated guesses there. What was blue to Moshe? Was ever the blue sources of water when it was not very plentiful in the desert in a time, or the blue sky? Of course, they crossed the Red Sea, and that was blue to them in their context too. This is blue as well in some contexts with shades of gray. The thing is that the oral law has made up and invented a huge array of laws, policies, and regulations to govern how Jews live today in the diaspora, apart from having a Sanhedrin, apart from having any kind of halakha court. Now, with the single exception of Eretz Israel, there are a group of chief rabbis who represent different aspects of orthodoxy in Israel. Okay, and they make certain recommendations, but their recommendations are not final. For instance, under oral law, we're forbidden to go to Har Habayit, Temple Mount, because we may incidentally step on the holy, and we don't know where the holy is. We don't know where the Ark of the Covenant used to be. We don't know where King Solomon temple was exactly. There's a lot of ideas about this. I'm not going to get into it. I've done videos on this before. But there's big signs plastered in marble and plaques going along the walls and sections and passageways leading up to Har Habayit. He says, by order of the chief rabbinate, you are not allowed, you're not permitted. No Jew is permitted, I put it this way, to transverse Har Habayit or Temple Mount based on oral law. You will not find this anywhere in the Torah that you are forbidden to go to Mount Zion or Mount Moriah and cleanse the temple. That didn't stop Ezra. That didn't stop Nehemiah. It certainly didn't stop, the hammer, Judah and Maccabees and his righteous father Mattathias for cleansing the temple. But we forgot where Zion was. We forgot where Mount Moriah was. We forgot where Hezekiah's tunnel was. We forgot, about Gihon Spring. We forgot about all of this until we actually could move into Eretz Israel with a significant population, of course, archaeologists and scientists too, in the early 1940s, when we established large communities there, and we had military defense posture to be able to support or sustain Israel as a nation. Of course, in oral law, according to mistranslations and a lot of confused debates over Rashi's position over Eretz Israel. That's why you see in Chabad, there's no Israeli flag, there's no American flag. The Rebbe Sneerson, as much as you may love him and everything else, he never set foot in Eretz Israel, even though people in Israel begged him to go, he'd never set foot there. The real reason, I'll just give you a hint, why he never went to Eretz Israel, he didn't really recognize the state of Israel's right to exist as a Zionist state, because he believed they were all secular, and many Satmars and a lot of extreme cults, essentially, in Judaism, who believe Palestinians should control Israel until the time of Mashiach. And I already told you before, Mashiach does not fix stupid. Moving forward with oral law, I'm going to give you a breakout, about 12 problem statements with oral tradition or the oral law. Scripture, again, makes it perfectly clear and emphasizes over and over again in the entire Torah that anything that could possibly be misconstrued as oral law is already written down. Is written down and approved and authorized through Moshe and the prophets. Of course, Moshe wouldn't have written any word down in the 5 books of Torah if God did not tell him to do. Isaiah, a very great prophet that lived around 730, 740 BCE, he spoke literally on behalf of God, behalf of Elohim, through most of his 66 books there. As far as interrelationships, human relationships, they're well documented in the Torah and Tanakh. You don't have to use your imagination to speculate too much. Now, you can look up Exodus 24:4. You can look up Deuteronomy 17, verses 8 through 19. You can look up 2 Kings chapter 14, 6, Ezra chapter 6, 18, Nehemiah 8, 1 through 3, and chapter 13. and verses 13 through 18 in chapter 8 in Nehemiah. These are portions within Sidra portions within the Tanakh that re-emphasize what I'm telling you, is that the Torah is final, it's divine, it was written down, approved, and monitored by God, because the Torah is actually the image of, the only image that Elohim, Jehovah God, allows to be portrayed. When you look at the Torah, you understand the nature and heart of the divine creator. You really do. The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Yaakov is codified in the pages and annals of the Torah, the prophets, and the sacred writings. Okay? King David had no doubt whatsoever who was the messenger. I mean, he had no doubt whatsoever about his position as king of Israel, Davidic king of Israel, and his relationship with Elohim as well, as far as what was written down and what was opinionated. Of course, King David may had some opinions about different positions. You heard about some of his problems and relationship issues that he had with wives and children and things of that nature. Of course, when King David did err, it was always because of the human frailty there, the weakness that every human has, especially men, not just from women, when he got into the opinionated framework. Of course, I already told you, the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, the Palestinian Talmud, were all documented and codified by more than 2,000 combined efforts of rabbis and scribes and other documentation efforts from other contributors, okay? Which was all opinionated. But over a period of time, it was unchallenged in a very illiterate world in the Dark Ages and Middle Ages. Many people during that time could not read, and only the rabbis had the keys to the treasure stores of Shamaim, of God. At least it would seem like, and they controlled all of that, much like the Roman Catholic Church, I may add, in those parallels there. Very, very clear how Roman Catholic priests and bishops profited literally as overlords, essentially, and managing ignorance, and who were allowed to read and understand the things that were in monasteries and things of nature. Why am I comparing Roman Catholics to rabbis in the Middle Ages? Was the same thing, is that to be a rabbi during the Middle Ages, you had to have money, you had to have philanthropists, you had contributors. Like Rashi was a very wealthy person, the way I understand. To go to yeshiva, you need to have a benefactor for that. Of course, that is, you learn the very basics of reading and writing, not too much in science and arithmetic, unfortunately, or the empirical method. Ramban excelled in that. So the oral law has many quotations from the Bible, and those quotations, those exact quoted references, are divine sidras, those little fragments and portions there. I want to emphasize that. But the Bible, when I say a Bible from now on, I'm talking about our Jewish Bible, the Tanakh, never quotes the Midrash or other rabbinical literature. Which obviously why they didn't quote that, because it's written far before the Talmud was codified in Babylonian. Those words and terminology and everything was just not found anywhere in the Jewish Bible, the Tanakh. This proves that oral law came into existence much later than the written law. Again, written law is everything written down literally by select chosen prophets of God, by judges of Israel, by kings of Israel, but mainly prophets, people that God used as his spoken voice about things that would happen futuristically, and of course blessings and admonishments and warnings and things of that nature, like aka the prophet of Daniel. Okay, so many of the oral law rulings, customs, and traditions directly contradict those in the Bible, and I'll get to that in a moment. The oral law contradicts many scientific facts. For instance, just educated guess, I could say, was not quantified. But again, if a rabbi said you had a certain number of ribs, then you had a certain number of ribs. You didn't question that at all. You just kissed his hand and accepted it. The Babylonian Talmud, Barakal 8a, I believe I have that, tractate. The gestation period of the snake is 7 years. Scientifically, the female snake's pregnancy lasts less than a year. Okay, but these actually were things that were placed in the Talmud, and they were considered sacred because righteous rabbis, they call them sages, they were essentially men, that completed yeshiva studying at Smika, were recognized to be rabbis, community leaders, and things of that nature. But their educated guess, even though it was based in superstition, it was not based in hard science or empirical science at all, it became accepted governance for everyone that was under their tutelage of their governance, okay? Literally, rabbis during the Middle Ages and before acted as governors over large groups of Jewish communities, if not mayors per se, okay? According to Babylonian Talmud, you can look in Shabbat 107 Bravo B. Lice are not created as a result of mating per se, but from human sweat. Now, to be fair, this was a belief of a lot of people, Gentiles, not just rabbis. The problem, even though there's no such thing as babies coming out of cabbage patches and other things, Darwin's theory of evolution came out much further in the future than these times. The thing is, it became law, accepted law. It also impacts arguments around abortion, fetuses, pregnancies and things of that nature. You'd be surprised how many Orthodox rabbis are the ones that recommend abortions for Jewish women when you had 600,000 Jewish boys and girls that were murdered in the Holocaust. It's pretty horrifying when you consider that. And Tel Aviv is the largest, pretty much the largest liberal abortion clinical area in the Middle East, the Levant, if not the world. It really is. And a lot of this comes from Rashi. Unfortunately, I don't want to get into a lot of detail with that, but simply is that Rashi actually used to inspect the viability of a fetus, whether it was stillborn or a living baby or not, with a candle and shining light, and see if he could see movement and things of that nature. And he made up in his mind that a baby, a fetus, growing, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, 8 months, 9 months until delivery, was just water and just flesh and nothing coherent. Of course, most Hasidim of Agadah, for instance, their position or against or anti-abortion. They believe in, they call it candidate Jewish life, as they put it. So I'm not saying all Orthodox rabbis and Orthodox Jews believe this, but there's a lot of mistranslation, a lot of confusion of Rashi's opinion that's in the Talmud. And when it became in the Talmud, it was treated by a lot of Orthodoxy as equal to the Torah. And that's where this Jew has pause for that. I really do. Okay? So moving forward, according to the Babylonian Talmud, the trachea divides into 3 branches. You're talking about bronchial tubes and things of this nature. Interconnects with your lungs. One leads to the lung, and one to the liver, and one to the heart. Of course, atomically, that's impossible. I would not be alive if that was true. Of course, there were autopsies and things of that nature. They knew of the inner workings of the body to some respect. But this was recorded in the Talmud, and this is taught in yeshiva to this day. And there's a big need of reform in yeshiva to teach some hard science, Darwin's theory of evolution. I'm not saying to teach secular pagan studies in any righteous Jewish university, but you need to have balance, yin and yang, between the extremes that you read in Talmud, written in the Dark Ages. That was their mindset and worldview. I mean, a lot of people argued if the earth was the center of the universe or not. They argued if the earth was round or not, okay? This is that world that you read in the Talmud that enforces halakha over majority of Jews on the planet. It really is. Okay, so according to the Mishnah, you can read there are 11 ribs, and I mentioned this for 11 ribs on each side of the human body. Physiologically, there are actually 12 ribs on each side. Okay, so they attempted to make assessments on biology, of science and things of that nature, the best of their knowledge at that time, which was never taught in yeshivas, and it was, in fact, they avoided scientific laboratories and academia in general because they considered it secular, evil, and contaminated. So they isolated themselves from really opening their mind and doing group thinking with people like Plato, because they thought they're too Hellenist. Ramban actually listened to some of the things that Plato said because some of the things he said was truthful. I hate to say that. Also, the Talmud itself never mentioned the rest of the oral law. It does not talk about. It's loaded with many contradictions. It does not give evidence that the oral law actually came from Mount Sinai. I already told you about a story about Rabbi Akiva. Moshe went to Mount Sinai twice to get the 2 sets of 10 commandments. He was there for 40 days, 40 nights. Why did he do all that time? Well, there's a story, I don't know if Rashi or someone else told this, it's in the Talmud, you can read about it, that God took Moshe up into heaven to celestial courtrooms and chambers of Shamayim, and then he was essentially waiting for Jehovah God to finish the 10 Commandments because he was putting crowns and everything above the letters of the 10 Commandments, okay? And while he was waiting, according to the story, Elohim told him, he said, why don't you go over there? You see that man over there? He's pointing to Rabbi Akiva in the future. So essentially, he went to the future and had a conversation with him. Why is it right? Why didn't you get a 10 Commandments, Rabbi Akiva? He seems to be a greater student than me. And he just told him to wait on him while he finished the 10 Commandments and bring parchments and some of the Talmud and oral law with him to give to Israel in his time. I'm not making this up, okay? It's like a Grimm's fairy tale or something. But anyway, the contradictions about science, about astronomy, about human relationships, about all kinds of things are in the Talmud. There are zero contradictions pretty much in the Torah and the prophets in the Tanakh. There's sometimes there appears to be a contradiction over numbers of military troops, like surge troops and things of that nature, but there's no real inconsistencies at all. And the prophets never debated over God's word among themselves through generations. In fact, there was no additional written commentary that was supposed to conjoin the Tanakh, the Jewish Bible, to explain discrepancies and things of that nature. The thing is, even though there were huge amounts of contradictions throughout the Talmud and Mishnah Torah, there was really no attempt to challenge these figureheads, sages, because you do not challenge a rabbi, period. And even today they teach it, that a rabbi can do no wrong, and that they were learned people. By completing 4 years in yeshiva, totally disconnected and isolated in most cases from the rest of the world, and then they get smicha, and they go isolated into the Orthodox shul, and they manage and lead a minyan for a Jewish congregation, for Jewish prayer, and that's all beautifully sweet and everything else, but that's the limits of their openness to this universe, okay? To humanity in general. Moving forward, I want to point out that the Talmud, again, is full of contradictions, and just logically, you can conclude from that it's not divine. Because God is not Confucius. God is not confused. God is not imperfect. God does not need our help as technical writers or spell checkers to clean up his muddy work. But rabbis have put themselves equal to Moshe. That's why Moshe is referred to commonly among Orthodoxy as Moshe Rabbino. So they say he's the master rabbi, he was the lawgiver, therefore we are ascended in that respect, and we can give laws too. We can have halakha and develop halakha for the ignorant populace, essentially. So that's where it comes from. The very fact that the Talmud is contradictory between literally 2,000 different personalities, okay? Ramban contradicted, I would estimate, at least 50% of all the things that Rashi said, okay? Like Adam stood so tall, he was up to the clouds in Eden. Moshe, when he parted the Red Sea, the Sea of Reeds, that he divided it 12 times with 12 tribes. Well, these are nice notions and everything else, but it's not in the Torah. It's something they created their own imagination and innovation. That's okay to speculate and have commentary, but not to call it halakha. Unfortunately, once it was infused in the Talmud and all those tractates, especially when they were put in book form and binders and things of that nature in around 15th century, they became equal to the Bible in many respects. This is why in most yeshivas, Orthodox yeshivas, they teach only the Talmud, the Mishnah Torah, the oral law. They do not teach the Torah as a primary rule of arbitration. So if a prophet said XYZ about a certain subject area involving Israel or different tribes and things of that nature, it takes them forever to get back to the original data source, which is the Tanakh, before they have all these roundtable discussions, debates, and literally arguments, tearing each other up and their personalities up. These person's wrong, I'm right, and all of this. It's not divine at all. I mean, we are the ones that argue about everything, right? God does not need to argue because he created everything perfectly and put everything in motion for us. It's up to us to define the truth and acknowledge the truth that God set in motion, not to make up the truth as we go on to meet our convenience zone, okay? So the Babylonian Talmud records a controversy over the question of over whether evening prayer is mandatory or not. Rabbi Gamaliel argued that it was mandatory. Rabbi Joshua, for instance, said it was not mandatory. So the arguments, praying 2 times a day, at least you're required to say Shema in the morning and say Shema at night before you go to bed. Some rabbis say you should pray 3 times. That is not mandatory to pray 3 times. And other rabbis said it was mandatory. So who do you believe, who you follow? Well, it depends on your rabbi, what school of thought he decides to follow. And you have to follow in step, just like in the military. And I'm an ex-veteran, and knowing a commanding officer above you in that chain, a hierarchical form of governance, you better follow marching orders or you'll be dishonored, be discharged, and kicked out. Well, that's how it is in a lot of synagogues. It really is. Also, the Babylonian Talmud records another controversy of the proper requirements for conversion. I already mentioned before, first century rabbi essentially changed thousands of years of written tradition from paternal lines to define a child as Jewish or not the mother. They changed it in the first century to be only the mother. And that became halakha. And you talk to any Orthodox rabbi today about Orthodox conversion, they say your mother had to be buried in a Jewish cemetery, and her mother or your grandmother before had to light Shabbos candles, and so on. They don't look at ethnicity. They don't look at tribal affinity. They don't look at any of that. They look at tradition. So in other words, if your mother was reinforcing oral tradition in her home when you were growing up, she's a Jew. And if her mother's mother was doing it, she was considered Jewish. It says nothing about the father. And nothing about the father. I mean, think about how many men are from Levitical bloodlines, priests of Zadok and everything else, but for happenstance, they marry someone who's not Jewish, and they have children. According to Orthodoxy, they're not Jewish, and you ignore the Levitical bloodline. Just consider that. Think about how many Jews among the 9.5 lost tribes, some say 10 tribes, throughout the world, about 15 million Jews throughout the world, 9 million in Israel. Think about how many Jews will never be found until the Mashiach comes and corrects the stupidity among us and all the arguing and everything else, and points out you're missing all the 10 tribes here because they're on paternal lines, not maternal lines. I would be surprised if that's not what happened. Okay, what if the Mashiach actually comes from a paternal line and not a maternal line? I mean, look at King David. His grandmother was a Moabite Ruth, even though she converted without the help of any Orthodox rabbi. So back to conversions and the contradictions around it. Rabbi Elazar, you probably heard him, very famous, argued that circumcision is necessary for all, Orthodox conversions, even though the word Orthodox was not used in the Middle Ages. It was first used in Corinth around 1880, a little more than 100 years, believe it or not, Orthodoxy. So Rabbi Joshua, again, these personalities here, argued that immersion is necessary, but not circumcision. So why not have circumcision as a standard? Abraham waited 99 years. His son Ishmael, was circumcised age 13, I believe. And to this day, Muslims circumcise their sons at age 13, same as Ishmael. They follow that tradition. Most Christians circumcise their boys as well. And many B'nai Noach also circumcised because they think it's medically necessary and prevents disease or whatever. I'm not going to get into all of that. But it's interesting that even in the Talmud and Mishnah Torah, they argue about conversion prerequisites and requirements. You have to be in a mikvah, immersion, and say prayers for that. Have to be circumcised, or you have to be both in the mikvah and both have a brit and all of this. Okay, so the debate continues about this. Okay, so the Babylonian Talmud records a dispute over the true author of Davarim, and this was in chapter 34. Okay. The one opinion is that Joshua wrote the final, 12 verses. That's the majority of the opinion today in modern Orthodoxy. And the opposing claim, argues that Moshe wrote everything there. Of course, Moshe died right after he gave the reins of leadership to Joshua. And it's very clear that Joshua wrote the 12 verses, but this is an argument in a Talmud about this, about authorship, okay? Of course, most people, whether you're a Sephardi Jew or Rabbinic, we all believe that Moshe, and only Moshe, wrote the 5 books of the Torah, okay, as given to him through Elohim, Jehovah God, okay? So even though the Torah forbids taking away or adding to its laws, the sages, unfortunately, have committed this abomination, I believe. It's premeditated. Okay, it's premeditated, adding and subtracting the words of God, the written words of God that comprise, the 5 books of the Torah, the major and minor prophets, and the sacred writing, like King David, the book of Esther, and other books like that. They actually made exceptions to the rule because they control the narrative. That's what I'm talking about. But I've read, to be fair, with some rabbinics, they explain it as this way, okay? We're in the diaspora. There's no temple. There's no Sanhedrin. So these are temporary additions to the written law, which is Moshianic law and covenant, until the Mashiach comes. And when the Mashiach comes, he'll set all the wrongs right, and then we will not enforce these laws anymore. It's good that Mashiach understands this in advance before he comes to avoid any confusion or scandals. Okay, so there's no mention of the oral law. I said it before. Even in the apocryphals, the Septuagint, so-called Christian Bible, and everything else, Dead Sea Scrolls says nothing about it. Or in any of the great historian Josephus, Flavius Josephus, and his writings, that he wrote, nothing is said about the oral law or the need to have additional companion to the Jewish Bible. Nothing is said about that. Now, you may say, well, Rabbi ben-Emmett, you sound like a Christian to me, because most Christians I know are against the Talmud, against the Mishnah Torah, against the oral law. No, that's not true at all, okay? I'm just using logical supposition. I'm providing you references. I'm providing use cases, names and events and things like that, and several areas throughout the Talmud and Mishnah that show an apparent attempt to massage, if not commit plagiarism against the Torah, and in the addition and subtracting of those sacred writings codified as written law versus oral law or oral tradition. Okay, I don't reject all. I do not reject oral tradition. Get me right. Don't get me wrong. I do not reject oral tradition. I do not reject the Talmud of Mishraimic writing to a point where it's used as halakha to judge and rule over me. Do you understand the difference? Okay. It is not the law of God just because rabbis have reached group consensus in the Gemara and other ways to say that this is the law of the land, okay, until the Mashiach comes. Okay, that's where I draw the line. The line in the sand. That's my red line, okay? The Ethiopian Jews, known as Beta Israel, you may have heard of them. They were approved finally after many of them died. A very sad situation. I don't know how many, 10 decades ago, but anyway, they eventually were allowed to Israel because they lived their life for hundreds and hundreds of years as Orthodox Jews, and they were allowed to aliyah with full benefits to Israel and become Israelis, national citizens of Israel. Well, what I'm trying to say is they became Jewish without reading one tractate of the Talmud, without reading one Mishnah Torah, without reading one book on Shabbat law, like the Beruma that I mentioned before. They became Jewish through God's leadership, and keeping all the laws, the 613 mitzvot, by reading the Jewish Bible in their language, I guess, and their own synagogue contact, without any exposure to oral tradition, because they're all interviewed. How did you become Jewish? The same thing with Uganda Jews I know. They've been Jewish Orthodox, living their life as Orthodox Jews since the days of Theodore Herzl. And they were recognized during their time in the 6th Jewish World Congress as Jews. In fact, there was funding to build yeshivas and other facilities, resources for them to help facilitate their Jewish faith. May God bless them. To wrap this up, neither the Sadducees or the Korhites accepted the authoritative divine nature of the oral law. And there is a misnomer here. I want to be very clear. Korhitism did not come from Sadducees. Okay, why did I say that? Because their belief system is very close to the 13 principles of what defines Judaism, written by the Ramban. Essentially is that. Sadducees, if you look at Reformed Jews today, those are Sadducees, okay? In other words, they don't believe in the temple. They don't believe in animal sacrifices. They believe their Zion is someplace else, like Berlin, Germany, really. And they don't believe in resurrection of dead. They certainly don't believe in Mashiach or the resumption of animal sacrifices, the new temple. They don't believe in that. However, Korhite Jews follow the rabbinics in those beliefs. We do. We have group consensus and what I just discussed there. Even though Rabbi Kaplan, I believe, which is the head of Reformed Judaism, did mention Korhites in some of his writings, that he adopted some of their ideas. And by the way, Korhite Jews are very proud to be who they are, and we don't really care if people copy what we do, or how we pray, or how we daven, or how we have Pesach. or how we do any of our holidays. In fact, we consider an honor when people want to model after us. Maybe Rabbinics should model after Jews. Just a little plug in there, okay? So I've covered about 12 problem statements of oral law about the various contradictions and things of that nature. Just understand this. The written law was written essentially by God. By God. By Melech Halam, Melech HaKavod, written by Jehovah God. Oral law was written by human beings. Of course, with humans, we fail and make mistakes, and we debate and we argue and we fight. Okay? That it's actually entertaining to read the Talmud to see all the full array of thought process and arguing and debates, how they come full circle and argue continually only to say the Torah was right. I mean, really, more times than not, they come back to the Gemara and they come back to the Torah and they said, we're going to fall back on the Torah for the truth. So why spend all the money in yeshivas, folks, to study oral law essentially, and so you can pass it down generation to your kids and become rabbis and pass it on to future synagogues, and you just perpetuate a myth and a lie. Okay, anything that's not of God directly is not of God is a lie. It's a compromise. It's 50 shades of gray. I hope I didn't upset anyone here. I hope I just pointed the white elephant in the room here and just let my opinion rest while you can be thinking about what I said. Listen, there are a lot of books out there. There are a lot of texts. There's a lot of university level research papers on this subject about oral law and written law. And it's very confusing among people that are not Jewish. I just want to explain to you that oral law is the spoken law. So, but who does the speaking? Not prophets of God. It's human beings. We speak something and we make it be true. You hear about perception is close to reality? Yeah, talk to Rashi. His perception became the reality for most of Chabadniks today. Good or bad, that's just the way it is. Anyway, Rabbi ben-Emmett signing out for another edition of Torah Watchman Show. Please subscribe, click like, get a free Gmail account if you can't subscribe to my YouTube channel. I can only grow my listening audience, my resources and everything else. I don't make any money off my videos at all. This is pretty much from my heart, and I love you. So when I research something and it excites me, I want to share it with you. I just want to share it with you. Okay? I'm a lighthouse on a hill that will not be hit. Okay? I'm not politically correct. I shoot from the hip. I tell you the Emmett truth as much as I can. If I'm ever wrong, I will redact it and retract it immediately. If you think I said anything wrong, please let me know. Send me an email to ben-Emmett, exactly the way it sounds, at gmail.com, and I will contact you immediately. Unlike Tovia Singer, I will respond to your email. Take care and God bless. Shalom Aleichem.